Hello, welcome to the Curious Wanderer Bible Study. Today is our eighth episode, and we're going to be continuing in Genesis, in Genesis chapter 11. Um, Genesis chapter 11 is very similar in some respects to Genesis 5. It's a transition chapter. So recall Genesis 5. Before we do that, let's just kind of recall where we're at. In chapters 9 and 10, we get to hear the story of Noah, the flood, and then the um, reconciliation of life back to God, the promise of the rainbow, um, Noah's sons, and etc. So that's where we left off. Now, chapter 11 is bridging the gap from Noah to Abram, much like chapter 5, bridge the gap from Adam to Noah. So, but there's a couple of interesting twists in this chapter. Chapter 11 has the story of the Tower of Babel, and we'll get to that in a minute because there's a lot of cool stuff happening there. But that's verses 1 through 9. The remainder, 10 through 32, is the transition to Noah from Noah, to Abram. So let's just look at verses 10 through 26, which go through the lineage of Noah to Abram. So reading from the NIV version here, um, verse 10, starting in verse 10, this is the account of Shem's family line. Remember, Shem was one of the sons of Noah. So 2 years after the flood, when Shem was 100 years old, he became the father of Arphaxad. And after he became the father of Arphaxad, Shem lived 500 years and had other sons and daughters. So the remainder from verse 12 through 26 follows the same pattern. How old they were when they had their son, the next one in the lineage bridging the gap from Noah to Abram. If we add up all the time, it's 292 years that transpire between the flood and Abram's birth. Now, if we remember back from Adam to Noah was almost 1100 years, a little over 1,000 years. So it seems like a much smaller time frame. But let's put it in context. This is the year 2023 as I'm recording this. And 292 years ago would be, 300 years ago would be 1723. 8 years from that would be 1731. So that's equivalent from going from 1731 to today. Lots of stuff has changed in the world in those 292 years for us. And similarly, lots of stuff changed during those 292 years, translated backwards, of course, from Noah to Abram. But we don't get particularly bogged down in the details of that because Moses, the writer of Genesis, wants to get to Abram and what happens with Abram. But we need to transition, and so we hear about how Noah gave rise to Shem, etc., down to Abram to provide context, to see that Abram was indeed a descendant of Noah through this particular line. And to provide context of almost 300 years have passed. So that's sort of verses 10 through 26. Now, starting in verse 27, we get to hear a little bit about Abram's family. Terah, so verse 27, this is the account of Terah's family line. So Terah is Abram's father. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran became the father of Lot. So the brother of Abram had a son, Lot. So Lot is Abram's nephew. Lot is important in the ensuing story, so they want to make sure we understand how he sits. So verse 28, while his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans in the land of his birth. Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was childless because she was not able to conceive. That becomes important a little bit later, but we're just setting the story now, setting the landmarks. Who are the players that are going to be playing in the coming chapters? Um, Verse 31 then gets some motion to the characters. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter in law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they went from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. So they were trying to get there, continuing. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. So they made it part way to Canaan. Terah lived 205 years and he died in Haran. So we have the stage set. We have Abram's father has moved them out to a new land, trying to get to Canaan, but stopping short. Uh, we have the player set. We've moved from Noah and his family to here. So the transition has been made very well. Um, Again, 290 plus years to get to there, 292 years to get from the flood to the birth of Abram, and then further from there to get the moving and Terah's, his father's death. Okay, so that's verses 10 through 26. But in Genesis verses 1 through 9, we get the story of the Tower of Babel. And I've read the story several times. I've talked about it with other people before. Um, and I had sort of this impression, almost not verbal. I couldn't quite put it into words until after reading this, preparing for the Bible study here, that it almost felt like a story from Greek mythology. Um, that God was jealous of humans and didn't want us to succeed, and so confused us. That's how I read it at first. And as I was preparing for the Bible study, I sort of realized that that's how I was reading it and understanding it, and thought that maybe that's not the right way to understand it. Maybe there's another way of looking at this. And as I did, I realized something about it. But before I go into that, let's actually read the verses. So there's just verses 1 through 9. So, verse 1, NIV. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used bricks instead of stone, and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens." Notice, to the heavens. "So that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, "If, as one people speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other." Verse 8. So the Lord scattered them from there all over the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. So my first reading was that God didn't want us to succeed, um, that he was almost jealous. But I have a slightly more nuanced understanding after reading this in the context of Genesis 1 through 10. So recall, before the flood, men had lived for a long time, and nothing but wickedness was in their heart, to paraphrase. Things had gone really badly. And one of the things that places that in context is we hear about the Nephilim in Genesis in before the flood. The Nephilim were these great heroes of old, um, and clearly they had a lot of strength and they had a lot of power, but they weren't using the power for good. They were actually using it for evil. Because they had power, it made them corrupt. Um, Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, is the old saying. And in that context, seeing that once people had too much power, everything went badly. So badly that God had to wipe off almost the entire planet. In that context, seeing this happening here, that the people were getting so much power that they felt they could build something up to heaven. Notice that, up to heaven, or up to the heavens. Um, God can see that this is going to go very badly. A side thought here is, it's also, this whole passage is very reminiscent to me of my childhood whenever I would get in trouble. Um, and my parents would give me some sort of punishment. My first thought a lot of times was that, oh, they just don't want me to have any fun. I mean, this is just fun. It's no big deal. Um, why should I be in trouble? They're just jealous. And that's clearly not the case, right? But from a child's perspective, that's what it feels like. And from a first reading perspective, it feels like God is jealous of people, but it's not jealous of. One little change of a word, he's jealous for us. He knows that if we have too much power, it will corrupt us. And so he wants to stop that before it starts, um, to protect. He's jealous for us. He wants us to live the best life we can. And having too much power makes us feel like we don't even need God. Um, so he wants to stop that before it starts. Another interesting point around this is that they want to build a tower up to heaven, or to the heavens. Um, it's almost like they want to be on the same plane as God. That's what it sounds like. And that was the original sin of Satan, that he wanted to be like God. He thought he was like God. And so humans were starting to go down that path, and God wanted to stop it before it went out of control. Um, so there's really a lot of meat happening here. Um, you know, this whole using technology for our betterment is a great thing. I'm making a podcast now. Clearly, I'm using technology to try and help myself and others. And people use it all the time for that. But sometimes we use technology to the exclusion of God, and as if he's not necessary, when he's very necessary. All the technology out there is dependent upon him. And it's worthwhile for us to remember that. And if we lose sight of that and think that we control everything, things go bad very quickly. Just like before the flood, um, just like at any point in time in history, when we think we're the only ones in control, life goes very badly. So, God is not jealous of us. It's not an old mythology Greek story. It's actually a story of a loving God who sees that we're going to go down a bad path and does something to avert that crisis, to help us. Much like a parent reprimanding a child before they grab a hold of a hot tea kettle, stopping it before it even happened, even though to the kid's perspective, that tea kettle looks interesting. It's red. I wonder why it's red. Let me go see what's up with it. You're about to get burnt. Ah, okay. God comes in, rescues you. We were about to go down a bad path, and God rescued us from it. So Genesis 11 is the story of a transition from Noah to Abram, but it also has some really deep meaning for us in today's world as we are surrounded by technology that makes us feel ever more powerful. We have to remember that it's a great tool, but it's like a hammer. It's a great tool, but we still need God to help guide us. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you next time.